Welcome in, Evan, Lazar and Mariah Janos here. We're waiting for the Patriots to select their number 96 overall pick. Evan, it's like there's a sale on wide receivers right now because they are flying. Like, can you let me know who's even left at this point?
Yeah, it's some disappointing names to come off the board recently. Certainly, Nico Collins, Amari Rogers, I believe Anthony Schwartz, the speedster from Auburn, just went with the last pick. So the Patriots are looking at a wide receiver board that at this point, unless they really like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Taylor Wallace from Oklahoma State, I'm a Amon-Ra St. Brown guy. I did really like his tape and think he has that sort of cerebral route running ability that usually succeeds here in New England. But with that being said, the league is clearly viewing Amon-Ra St. Brown and maybe a guy like a Taylor Wallace as a early day three prospect. And most of the time, that pegs to athleticism and maybe a lack of speed. And that's certainly something that I think stands out with those two guys as possible concerns. So neither guy's the fastest in the world. They're both good at the top of the route, though. My fear with a guy like Taylor Wallace, who I did really like on tape at times, but Oklahoma State runs a very limited passing system. So he didn't run a whole lot of different routes as a part of their offense. And putting a guy that had a limited route tree in New England's offense doesn't always spell a great fit to me because they run so many multiple types of routes. So for me, I think I go away from the wide receiver position at this point after this little run that we saw here and go towards maybe the defensive side of the football again or offensive tackle, which we can also talk about here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me some of the guys that you're looking at there.
So the big one is Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa is still on the board. I think at some point, Senior Bowl guy, we talked about how big he is, obviously, and how athletic he is. Those are things that I really like about him. So if you want to get that developmental tackle prospect, as we get Mariah back in here, if you want to get that developmental tackle prospect, he's definitely somebody that stands out on the board for me still right now. Once you get past Spencer Brown, James Hudson from Cincinnati had some really good tape. And in the bowl game against Georgia, this past season, they were competing with Georgia really well. Cincinnati was, and James Hudson got thrown out of the game at halftime for a targeting penalty. He hit a guy late out of bounds. He gets tossed from the game, and the second round pick Azeez Ojulari takes over the game for the Georgia defense without the starting left tackle there for Cincinnati, and just wrecks the game for Cincinnati in the second half. So they definitely saw a drop off at Cincinnati. Now, granted, I'm sure the Cincinnati backup is probably not the same as an NFL backup, but they had a really bad time after James Hudson got thrown out of that game blocking the Georgia edge defenders, whereas when he was in the game, they were able to keep Desmond Ridder pretty clean and able to move the football. So I think that that's a guy that you look at that definitely had some impact. I like Jabril Cox out of LSU. I don't know if he's necessarily a Patriot fit. We're talking about linebackers now, moving over to the defensive side of the ball. But how about this, Mariah? We've got Mac Jones. We got Christian Barmore. So we already got two Alabama guys. We're already checking off the Nick Saban boxes. How about Dylan Moses, the linebacker from Alabama? Just go Crimson Tide for the first 2 days of the NFL draft. A very athletic player. Dylan Moses tore his ACL 2019, or maybe it was the end of the 2018 season, and he didn't really bounce back right away from that injury. So something that we definitely have to keep an eye on is that injury red flag. But a very athletic player that can play in space, can play in coverage, didn't necessarily live up to the hype of his recruitment at Alabama, but sometimes Bill Belichick likes those types of guys, the guys that were highly touted high school prospects, had some injuries, had some issues and bumps in the road, led them astray, and maybe they didn't have as good of a college career as they wanted. He brings them here. He has that versatility, that ability to play on the line of scrimmage as a blitzer or off the line of scrimmage in coverage or as a run defender. The last one I'll mention quickly, then we can kind of deliberate a little bit here, is Cameron McGrone from Michigan. I'm just going with what we know. And what we know is that Bill Belichick seems to be sticking to programs that he feels comfortable with. So it makes a whole lot of sense if it's not an Alabama linebacker. And let's turn to the Michigan linebackers because they typically go for those types of guys too. And McGrone has a very similar story in terms of his background as Josh Uche, somebody that didn't play a ton at Michigan until later on in his career due to depth at that position. He comes in, he has a really good season last year, stack and shed linebacker that has good athleticism. So I think that that's a player that the Patriots would be interested in as well. It's really a point of time though right now that you have to start to weigh value at the end of the third round here. And Spencer Brown just went off the board, of
I was
course, to the
about to
Buffalo
say that.
Bills. So there goes my guy at
Oh,
tackle. I think the Patriots at this point, unless they like James Hudson, I liked him a little bit. Deontay Smith from East Carolina had some interesting tape. It's pretty difficult to find East Carolina tape, believe it or not. So I wasn't able to watch a ton of him, but somebody that I did get a little bit in there, and I feel like he's someone that maybe is a developmental tackle if that's what you're looking for. But I don't know. It's a tough, and we keep on getting Mariah bouncing out here.
I don't know what's happening.
I think tackle and corner at this point in the draft, the cupboard's pretty barren for developmental long-term tackle starters and developmental outside corners. You know, that I don't know if those two spots, the value is necessarily lining up here. So we'll see what happens. Wide receiver too, a lot of those guys gone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how about the running back position? I feel like those are few and far between as well. I haven't seen much going on there. Do you expect the Patriots to even consider that?
So I'm not a running backs guy. Like I just don't want to see the Patriots use another premium pick on a running back when you have Damian Harris and Sony Michel on the roster. Those are two top 100 picks, two top 75 picks, if I remember correctly, with Damian Harris. So those guys, to me, those are your workhorse backs this year, and I just don't see the need to take another top 100 back. But Michael Carter from North Carolina is still sitting on the board right now. He's the other North Carolina running back. The first one went Williams. He went up there right in the 30s. So Michael Carter is a player that I think can do a little bit of everything out of the backfield. And we talk about replacing a guy like a Rex Burkhead, for instance. That might be an important role for the Patriots, a guy that can do a little bit on the rushing on the interior. We're just going to keep this going all night long. It's okay, folks. Rushing on the interior like a Rex Burkhead can between the tackles, but also then catching the ball a little bit out of the backfield. I think those are some things that they can do as well. So I'm not a big running backs guy, but you draft Mac Jones in the first round. He had Najee Harris playing next to him in the backfield last year. You definitely need to have a good running game for this team to be able to be the offense that they want to be, especially you got a lot of 12 personnel, two tight ends on the field. Got to be able to run the football. And Mac Jones is going to want to work off of play action as well. So you got to have that play action influencing somebody to actually play the run and step up into their gaps to get them out of coverage. So I think there is some instances where I can talk myself into running backs now because they did draft Mac Jones.
Okay. Now, where are we at currently with the draft? I can't even change my screen because I will get logged out again.
We're at pick 94 right now, so we're coming up. New England is, you can see it like on the ticker, right? You know, you can see the Patriots NE right there. So the Ravens are making their pick right now. So the Patriots are basically on deck at this point, and I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where they go from here because it seems like it. And I like Barmore and I like Mac Jones. I think those are two really solid picks. It seems to me, though, like they are going to just go with programs and go with places that they feel really familiar with. And I find it hard to believe that we're going to get the left field pick this year, the Kyle Duggar, you know, the guy from a small school that none of us have heard of. I feel like they're going with Alabama guys. Maybe they go with the Michigan guy and Cam McGrone. It's going to be interesting to see where this pick ends up, though, because I think that the value of, okay, they got to take this corner. They got to take this tackle. They got to take this wide receiver. I don't have a guy right now that I would say they absolutely need to take here at 96.
Yeah, it absolutely should be interesting. And I mean, we've mentioned it so many times. This year's draft has part of the reason it's so interesting is because of the lack of information out there on all of the players. So yeah, it makes sense to rely on the big name schools that Bill Belichick has great connections with.
Right.
But Boston College alum, Hunter. Okay, nope. My Twitter is just, I'm relying on my phone at this point because I'm so nervous that I'm going to get logged out right as they pick. And we're just going to keep on refreshing.
We'll see. I mean, look, the Alabama players, the other one I'll mention quickly is Deontay Brown, the guard from Alabama that I think a lot of people will remember from the national championship game. He was the guy that everybody was taking pictures of and showing because he literally looks like an absolute monster on the football field. I mean, they had people like photoshopping him with like Blastoise, the Pokemon, because he's just this absolutely giant guy. Him and Michael Onwenu on the same offensive line is just a ton of beef. Like that's 800 pounds of human, right? So both those guys are massive dudes. They're both Alabama guys. I mentioned Dylan Moses already. Baron Browning from okay, so they're going to take Ronnie Perkins from Oklahoma. So it's an edge rusher from Oklahoma, Ronnie Perkins, who has heavy, heavy hands. This is a really interesting player. I did not think Ronnie Perkins would be on the board at this point in time. I thought that he would be off the board at this point. So the Patriots go with upside. They go with potential here. Another big program, Oklahoma. Yeah. That's something that we got to point out as well. But what I really like about Ronnie Perkins is his ability to use his hands to soften the edge. This is a guy that's a really cerebral hand fighter, understands the kind of matchups that you're going to get with tackles versus those edge guys, can really throw heavy hands, soften the edge, set the edge, and has a little bit of get off, but I wouldn't say that that's really his game. Most of his game is the ability to throw those hands and be a powerful guy at the point of attack. So I am a little surprised the Patriots go back to edge defender, though, because they have so many bodies at that position, right, based off of the guys that they brought in free agency, and obviously as well the guys that they had in the last couple of drafts, like Chase Winovich and Anthony Jennings. So I like the fit for Ronnie Perkins, and I like the spot that they're getting Ronnie Perkins in at this point. But I am interested that they went with another edge defender. They seem to be very stacked at that position.
Yeah, they really are. I feel like he maybe might not see the field unless there is some certain situation. But I was going to say, do you see him as being like an immediate impact player, or is it something that they're going to have to develop him for a little bit?
You know, he's a really polished, nuanced hand fighter. So I think that he can play pretty early on in that sense. You know, this is not a guy that wins with get off and athleticism and is a streaky player. Like, I think Christian Barmore is a little bit more of that volatile type of prospect where the good is good, but the bad is also there. Whereas with a guy like Ronnie Perkins, he was just very steady on the edge for Oklahoma and a very strong and stout edge defender as well. So can he play right away? I think that that's the type of player that usually you take that can play right away. Hello, Mariah. But I just there we go. But I just really am surprised that they took another edge guy. But I just mentioned they don't have a ton of guys on the board at some of their real positions of need: corner, tackle, wide receiver. I wonder if one of those guys that went like Anthony Schwartz or Nico Collins was somebody that they had their eye on. Once they flew off the board, it kind of came a position of, let's just take the best player available, who's the guy we have graded the highest. Right. Most boards right now probably have Ronnie Perkins as one of the top prospects still available.
Do you see the Patriots maybe using that as leverage to make a trade post-draft, or staying put?
That's an interesting question. You know, I kind of threw out the idea of at what point in time do they kind of look at Chase Winovich and say, you're a really good football player, we're just not sure where you fit in this defense in terms of your every down role. We know you can rush the passer. We know you can play on passing situations, but you're a situational rusher for us at this point. And maybe they do look to see, okay, can we get somebody that's a little bit more well-rounded? Can we get somebody that's a little bit more of an early down guy? That's not necessarily Chase Winovich. I don't think Uche is an every down edge defender. He's somebody that needs to develop a little bit more at inside linebacker to play on early downs. So they didn't have, I guess, in terms of youth, a guy that maybe they felt really good about in terms of early down edge defense. And I think Ronnie Perkins can do that sort of thing. But I don't know. I don't know where he plays in terms of his role this year. I don't know how he gets onto the field this year. Kyle Van Noy, Matt Judon are going to be your starting edge defenders in week one with Chase Winovich rotating in, you would think. So, yeah, maybe it does open the door to a trade of one of those guys. Now, if they're going to trade Winovich, you think it would happen right now, right? I don't think that they're going to only get a fourth or a fifth round pick back for Winovich. Maybe it's a pick next year. We'll see. Maybe it's a player. Who the heck knows? But I think that this is had to have been a Ronnie Perkins is just the best player available on our board right now, and we don't really love the need fits anyplace else.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, while I have you, hopefully I don't get kicked off again. Let's look ahead to tomorrow really quickly, and looking at those final rounds. What needs need to be addressed tomorrow? Who's available? Are they just out of the count for wide receivers at this point? I just keep looking at our comments, and everybody is asking about wide receivers. So do
Sure.
you expect them to even go in that direction for the rest of the
Look,
draft?
I like some of the wide receivers in day three. And I think at this point in the draft, you can see the value maybe being there a little bit more later on in the draft with some of those guys. Just to name a few that I really thought stood out in film review, I still love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think the league is soured a little bit on Amon-Ra St. Brown because he's not the most athletic and he's not the most explosive route runner in terms of vertical downfield speed. Today's NFL, you got to be able to take the top off. That's just the way that the league is going. Is that you got to go towards those fast, vertical type of threats. Shea Smith from South Carolina is a really interesting slot guy. He's someone that I think is going to be an 80-90% slot receiver, but he's got that explosive, just short area agility and movement skills to get open in the slot. So I really like that one as well for the Patriots. So a couple of the sleepers that I would look at, Amir Smith-Marset from Iowa, really, really smooth route runner. Not necessarily the fastest guy, so that's why he's coming into day three as well, but just kind of a smooth technician that understands how to get open at the line of scrimmage, understands how to use little subtle movements and stuff like that to create separation. I also really like Semi Fahaku from Stanford, who is 6'4" and ran a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. So you got size, speed, prospect, really, really raw, right? Drops the ball a lot, takes too much time to get into his breaks and at the line of scrimmage, too much dancing. Just got to get into the route, right? Got to get into the route, got to get out of your break. If he can develop those types of things technique-wise, though, there are very few players that kind of show up on tape that are as fast as him in terms of day three talent. So he's somebody that I would definitely look at as well. Seth Williams from Auburn's a nice player too. If you want that outside X receiver, he's a big body target. He had some really nice tape. Also had some really bad tape and inconsistent effort on tape at times. So those are some concerns with him. But he's got some big time games out there for Auburn where he really showed out. So I think there is some wide receiver talent that's still available. Marquez Stevenson from Houston's another of those like pesky little slot receivers. Cade Johnson from South Dakota State, another one of those guys that had a really big Senior Bowl week. It's a deep wide receiver class. So it's a good sort of class to get, a wide receiver in day three. Cornell Powell from Clemson too. He's still on the board as well. I forgot about him. I just named like 5 to 10 guys. So there's still talent out there. But I think the expectation for the player that they draft now has to dwindle a whole lot. Unless they take one at 120. If they take a guy that, some of these top available guys like a Taylor Wallace, like Amon-Ra St. Brown at 120, I think that we can have some reasonable expectations for a player like that.
Do you expect any more trade ups?
I thought the Patriots would continue to consolidate picks in this draft. We've talked about a lot the fact that there's not a whole lot of information on these guys. There's not a whole lot of medical information. There's not a whole lot of tape out there because of this pandemic season. A lot of seasons getting canceled or shortened or whatnot. So there's just not a whole lot of info out there anyways. So I think that you could definitely get another guy, another trade here, and maybe we have another trade here tonight. They moved up late for Dalton Keene last year, trading a couple of fourth rounders to get back into the end of the third to take another player right after they took Asiasi. I wouldn't be surprised if we're back on again in a few minutes and they trade back up from 120 maybe to get one of these wide receivers.
Well, hopefully my internet stays okay for that. But for now, we are going to resume watching the rest of the draft, and I suggest you all do that as well. And if the Patriots do move up, like Evan said, we will hop back on here and discuss all the good stuff. But of course, as always, for all of our Patriots coverage, head to clnsmedia.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel over at Patriots Press Pass.
Oh my God.
Bless you.
I was literally holding that in.
Bean.